My name is Norman Rose, and I'm going to tell you about the history of RAF Bentwaters. For me, it's a journey back in time, the way it was. I returned to Bentwaters 7 years after it was abandoned by the USAF and the Ministry of Defence. Welcome to Bentwaters. This is one of 110 bases in use in East Anglia during World War II. The red dots here indicate each operating station. To begin, I take you back to 1942. We're in the middle of World War II, and we should remind ourselves of the history of this area. Here the map shows two beautiful old houses, Rendlesham Hall and Ash High House. Lord Ullswater, ex-Speaker of the House of Commons, runs the High House. He has just had word that his grandson, Lieutenant John Lowther, has been killed in a plane crash with the Duke of Kent, our King's brother. The Duke's party had recently visited his lordship. They stayed overnight and departed the next morning to meet RAF bomber crews at RAF Mildenhall. The war was fighting hard. Rendlesham Hall is occupied by the British Army Tank Corps, and the 4 lodges protecting the hall will see much toing and throwing. Ivy Lodge is occupied by Mrs. Kersey and her young son. They are getting on the best that they can. Mr. Kersey, a gardener, now a soldier, has been taken prisoner at Singapore. Army tanks will manoeuvre through the archway on their journey through Tunstall to their training area at Aiken and Sudbourne. The Air Ministry have decided to build an airfield here at Bentwaters for the United States 8th Army Air Force, with the living quarters adjacent to Rendlesham Hall. The Butley Road will be closed to the public, and up to 8 families will be relocated to other homes. These cottages will be demolished, as will Walnut Tree Farm buildings, but this one will remain intact. The Ministry engineer responsible to oversee the airfield construction will use the old cottage as office space. The airfield construction will require hundreds of truckloads of aggregates hauled through Tunstall from Lowestoft to get the job done. Tunstall gets all the traffic. Come the summer of 1943, and the new station is taking shape. Americans call them bases. The 10 sites making up the living quarters, extending to the front garden of Rendlesham Hall, are complete, and the aircraft parking dispersals, or ramps, are quite close to the public highway as it snakes its way to Woodbridge Town. A new road, or bypass, will open in the early 1960s. There is much going on here. The 8th and 9th Army Air Force heading for their targets in occupied Europe is an everyday occurrence. Now I'm standing on the edge of the main runway at RAF Bentwaters, and behind me was where the little cottage that Bentwaters' name came from stood on the edge of the tree spinney here behind me, and the occupants of that little cottage, of course, had to move out. They had been quite happy there. They had visited the church over to the east, and whenever they wanted to go shopping, they would go northwards to Tunstall. The access only was, of course, by footpath. That was their only means of access. Now, The old cottage was destroyed, broken down, but I do remember a small unit of US Army, an army unit. They came and they practiced in this cottage of how to flush out the enemy. And I thought how interesting it was to see them attacking a few of the troops that they had put inside the cottage, and I suppose, to them was a great exercise. And they then, of course, left the old cottage to fall down, and the contractors cleared it away. But that's the story of the Bentwaters, the name Bentwaters. RAF Woodbridge, known in World War II as RAF Sutton Heath, is opening up as an emergency landing strip, receiving battle-damaged aircraft of all nationalities. It will become very successful in receiving aircraft, particularly in foggy weather, as it operates its FIDO, Fog Intensive Dispersal Operation. Looking at the 10 sites at Bentwaters, Site 4 will be a temporary home for the RAF ground crews working at Sutton Heath. At the end of each day, they will cycle to Bentwaters via Friday Street and get a good night's sleep away from the crash landings. Site 4 huts will become married quarters for RAF families in the late 1940s and end their days as American single officers' quarters. It is now September 1943, and the 8th and 9th Army Air Force are suffering severe battle damage. Some aircraft are unable to make the Woodbridge Strip. Light bombers, such as Havocs and Marauders, are now dropping in on the Bentwaters runway. Now I'm standing on the runway at Bentwaters, runway 3214. Now this runway, like the other two runways, was clear and complete, and one Sunday evening in late September 1943, a light American bomber, a Marauder, came into land on this runway because he had been battle damaged. He had suffered battle damage. Now he finished up at the bottom end, but the crew was safe. That was the important thing. And following weekend, another one came in. That was a Boston Havoc, and they were also seeking somewhere to come into land because he had been battle damaged. So they were the two very first aircraft to ever use Bentwaters. That was in September 1943. This is rather dicey as the workmen try to complete the groundworks. Heavy bombers, such as B-17s and B-24s, follow, and the situation is now to keep a constant watch out. Even placing obstructions on the runways was no deterrent. For the air crews, whether it's Bentwaters or Woodbridge, they were happy to be down safely. The RAF have decided to place a small rescue party here at Bentwaters, such as a fire engine, ambulance, similar to the Woodbridge force, for attending to the wounded air crews. As we reach summer 1944, the tanks have gone south to prepare for the Normandy landings, and the Free French Airborne Division had taken over Rendlesham Hall. While there, they have a visit from General Gale, with some troops receiving awards. The Airborne Division will train in a hawser glider, similar to, as we see here, these troops training on how to load the gun and jeep. Alas, as the glider is towed into the Bentwaters airspace, preparing to land, control is lost and it crashes on runway 32 with the loss of all 13 French airborne troops. Sadly, the Halifax tow plane leaves on its own. The war is biting hard. Now, word has just been received that the 8th Army Air Force have decided that they will not now need Bentwaters Airfield. It's the 48th completed base of the 50 planned for the 8th. They claim to have sufficient bases to meet the job in hand. As we approach autumn 1944, the RAF have decided to use Bentwaters as a fighter escort station, and the first group captain, station commander, arrives in his airspeed Oxford. He will reside in the small bungalow adjacent the officers' mess. The Bentwaters Tower will operate without a top cabin, similar to this one. The tower cabin was not in use at Bentwaters until the late 50s. By mid-December 1944, 6 squadrons, 72 in all, Mustangs, have bedded in, and on the 20th of December begin escorting the RAF bombers on daylight missions. We had our losses and mishaps. On one occasion, a Mustang landed on runway 3214 with his guns blazing. This prompted the Wicker Market railway station master to report his goods wagons were under attack. The war ended in May 1945, with Bentwaters claiming at least to have contributed some part in the remaining 6 months of hostilities. The fighters, apart from a few Spitfires, have departed Bentwaters, and in September the Spitfires will take part in the first Battle of Britain flypast, led from Bentwaters by Group Captain Douglas Bader, the legless pilot, a tradition that has continued into the millennium. In October 1945, Bentwaters move into the jet age. Meteor pilots, under the command of ex-Battle of Britain pilot Laddie Lucas, begin training in the faster aircraft, which offer a very different sound in the skies over East Anglia. They had their problems, and the press were soon ready to remind us of the dangers involved in flying the much faster Meteor. A year later, in October 1946, the Bentwaters Meteors would move to RAF Wattisham. It's a base built in the 1930s, which now had hardened runways and would provide more comfort with its permanent brick accommodation. For the next 3 years, Bentwaters will be a training unit. Number 226 Operational Conversion Unit, converting from piston-type aircraft to jets, such as Mosquitoes to Meteors and Tempests to Vampires. And I'm delighted that we have been joined by Sid. Now, Sid was a Mosquito pilot here at R.A.F. Bentwaters in the period of 1947 to 1949. And it gives me great pleasure that Sid has joined us.
I was posted here in November 1947 from R.a.f. Feltwell, where I was a flying instructor on the all-through training scheme. I came here to number 226 Fighter OCU, Operational Conversion Unit, as a pilot training people on the Mosquito, and also as the weapons officer. That is the application of guns and bombs and rockets in the fighter role. I hadn't been here more than a few weeks when I was posted to the Officers Advanced Training School at Hornchurch for a couple of months. When I came back, the ministry discovered I'd been flying almost continuously since 1938, so they figured I should do a ground job, and they made me the adjutant. The CO at the time was a Wing Commander George Nottage. The unit then was quite small. We didn't have very many airmen, and the OCU wasn't working at full strength because I suppose we'd got enough pilots and we weren't converting many. We had here the Meteor 3 and a Vampire, and later on a Meteor 7, so we could give a dual control. I stayed in the job until November 1949 when I was posted to Germany.
Well, that's great, and that's very nice, Sid, and thank you very much for coming along and giving us that breakdown of your service at Bentwaters. 49, as you said, and that was it for the RAF. They took everything away and left us to the rabbits and whatnot. That was lovely. Thank you very much. Thank you. That's very nice.
And so Bentwaters was placed on care and maintenance, awaiting an uncertain future. In 1950, my new wife and I took up residence in the old cottage adjacent the main gate. This cottage had been office space in the early days. At weekends, the Bentwaters runways were now used by learner drivers. We were proud of our old cars in those days, and the grassed areas on the airfield were cultivated to grow urgently needed corn following the war years. In early 1951, Bentwaters returned to the military with the arrival of building contractors and a small contingent of RAF and USAF personnel. Some other wartime airfields had been left with just a museum, like the 390th Bomber Group at Parham, and the 356 Fighter Group at Martlesham Heath. However, Bentwaters would not be returned to the farming industry, but would become a frontline NATO base. The advanced military units are settling in, and early September, the USAF doctor directed his streamlined ambulance to take my wife Lottie to Ipswich Hospital for the birth of our baby daughter. Anglo-American relations had got off to a good start, just like old times. And this was my first experience of a cigar lighter inside an automobile. It is also late August, early September that the United States Air Force 81st Tactical Fighter Wing is directed to serve in the United Kingdom. The first F-86 Sabre jets arrive at Shepherd's Grove. The 116 Squadron, later to be replaced by the 78th Squadron. The 91st Squadron, with the 81st Wing Headquarters staff bedding in at Bentwaters, and later the 92nd Squadron forming up and operating from Manston in Kent. Quick reaction ramps to main runways are in place. It's a coincidence that Bentwaters and Shepherd's Grove runways have the same numbering. It has to be said that the vehicle traffic crossing the runway at Bentwaters to reach the south side was not a happy time, with its delays awaiting sometimes well over an hour for a green light to cross the runway proved very costly. A perimeter road was urgently required. However, this new road did come on stream following a fatal accident involving an F-101 in the early 1960s. The F-86 proved a worthy fighter, as each squadron trained with the RAF Fighter Command aircraft. The F-86 could reach Mach 1, and the sonic boom was demonstrated during a visit by the Duke of Edinburgh. His party enjoyed the loud bang from the tower balcony. The T-33 trainer joined the wing for pilot training, and as funding became available, it must be said that from this point the development of RAF Bentwaters began, as the first new facilities came on stream. A new chapel, now a Rendlesham Church, and the Rod and Gun Club, both very welcome. Tragically, Major Maney, the base civil engineer at the time, was killed in a rifle accident at the Gun Club. Permanent barrack blocks and many more facilities were being programmed. However, the first public open day was enjoyed by the local people, as they were allowed to get a closer look at the new jets. At the end of 1953, Bentwaters runway was closed to flying for extension work and over-slab strengthening. By 1954, a replacement aircraft was on the cards. The F-86 will be replaced by the F-84. and the 81st Wing is to be known as a fighter bomber wing. The F-84 was an aircraft that would keep the Russians on their toes, a remark made by the United States General as he launched the new aircraft. This was not received very well by Mr. Khrushchev, the Russian president, who branded the United Kingdom an aircraft carrier with so many American bases. The tried and tested MA-1A arrestor barrier was now an additional flight line facility. And as we move into 1955, Bentwaters and Shepherd's Grove get their first urgently needed married family housing, known as tobacco bungalows, constructed with money owed for tobacco. Over 200 of these would also be constructed at the Woodbridge base. RAF Woodbridge would be brought out of care and maintenance to become part of the 81st Wing complex. In 1958, Bentwaters flight line would be further upgraded, and the 92nd Squadron would relocate from Manston to join the 91st Squadron at Bentwaters. The C-123 provider would be busy hauling the 92nd equipment from Manston along the coastline to the Bentwaters south side flight line. Soon after this relocation, another important move is programmed. The 78th Squadron is to relocate from Shepherd's Grove to Woodbridge base. This is to be on a shared arrangement with the 79th Squadron flying Thunderjets. The 79th was part of the 20th Tactical Fighter Wing at Upper Hayford. These moves no doubt helped both wings budget their needs. But the 78th Airmen will now have a long daily haul back to their married family housing at Shepherd's Grove. 1959 saw the arrival of the Vodo. The F-101 will replace the F-84, introducing reheat and drag chute braking to Bentwaters. New jets with new techniques. The Vodo is demonstrated very well on open day. One of the wing commanders in the Vodo days was Colonel Robin Olds. Now he and his actress wife, Ella Raines, knew just the way to put on a party. Tragically, as I mentioned earlier, a Vodo missed the runway, colliding with the vehicles at the runway crossing point, coming to rest in the butler sheds. Number 4 shed was never replaced. Sadly, a serviceman at the vehicle crossing was killed. Hence the perimeter road was brought on stream soon after. Many more facilities opened up as we moved into the 1960s and 70s, such as A-10's shopping complex, commissary extension, a cinema, and a petrol service station, fuel at US prices. The Woodbridge shuttle bus was now a welcome twin-base connection. Bentwaters bypass is now opened, which will close off the old half-mile road and take the public away from the airfield boundary. A roundabout will give easier traffic access and control. More married family housing are constructed, and a new bowling alley is opened up. The control tower cabin is refurbished and munitions areas are made more secure. Another aircraft change is programmed. The F-4C Phantom replaces the Vodo. The Phantom will serve at Bentwaters for 13 years. A very noisy aircraft, but one that will become the main force serving NATO. In 1967, Her Majesty the Queen dropped in on her way to the Snape Concert Hall. A very important moment for Wing Commander Richard Searles and the RAF liaison officer. The Wing School complex is well established at Woodbridge Base. Some facilities had been a long time coming, especially the gym, but come it did, and very welcome, air conditioning included. Everyone is dedicated in replacing old temporary buildings and getting new facilities on stream. Barrack blocks are typical of this change. This new aircraft maintenance complex is another welcome completed project. A single story for each squadron and a two-story control building. The Colonel was happy to take over this new addition from the project manager. Sergeant Steve Schaefer, who spent many years in this building, talks to us now about the years in the new facility.
We're in the maintenance control facility, and I have with me Sergeant Steve Schaefer, who did a number of years in this particular section of maintenance, and he is very kind, turned up to give us a few words on what it was like working in this building. Did you find the facility very useful and practical?
For us, it was a very practical facility.
Yes.
This was the office that we're in now, the Deputy Commander for Maintenance, and his entire staff worked within this building, including the nerve center, if you would, of the maintenance complex, the control center down below, which kept tabs on all of the aircraft. I think we had, when the A-10s were here, about 120 aircraft between Bentwaters and Woodbridge Base, and every one of the aircraft had a full complement of listings of what the operational status of the aircraft was, the types of munitions that it had, what sort of countermeasures, avionics, sorts of things that were tied up in each aircraft, depending on the type of mission that it might be going on.
Yeah.
And then the rest of his staff, the quality control people, the folks that took care of things like the statistics, the manning for the maintenance complex. We probably had between 1,500 and 2,000 people that worked for the DCM in the maintenance complex at any one time.
Yes.
So it was really quite a large operation over the two bases with all of the aircraft and the shelters. So it was a very substantial operation and very busy.
And these new facilities, of course, were coming on stream and were proving to be an asset to the wing.
Oh, very much, from a point of view of a bit of comfort, if you would, for the military that were working in them, as well as the functionality of the things like the aircraft shelters and the weapons storage areas, the munitions areas.
Yeah.
All of these things were constantly being looked at to try to upgrade them a little bit if we could. And if we could, maybe keep one step ahead of the other wings within the United Kingdom, because there was always a bit of competition between the wing commanders as far as who's got most going on within his wing at any given time.
And Bentwaters certainly got their share.
We definitely got our share. We did very well, considering we were fairly far away from the nerve center in Mildenhall. We didn't do too bad. Our bosses made sure that we got at least our fair share of the funding that was available to take care of our facilities and our people.
And the 81st wing was a fairly efficient and very good wing. Really.
Always came out very well on our evaluations.
Yes.
We were highly looked on by all of the command.
Well, we miss them a lot, you can be sure.
I think there's an awful lot of Americans that miss being here as well, believe me.
Yes. Thank you, Sergeant Schaefer.
Thank you.
Very good, and we shall no doubt mull over the loss of the American Air Force from this area for many years to come.
1977, and the aircraft shelter project gets the go-ahead. Even more need for secure and serviceable facilities to remain a frontline force. Sadly, while shelters were being completed at the other bases, Bentwaters and the 81st Wing were caught up in an industrial dispute that extended building site conditions for many, many extra months. Life in peacetime Britain. Now, there was one occasion that the Phantom flying did not go according to plan. After a two-ship takeoff towards Woodbridge Town, one developed trouble and requested to land downwind. The Phantom landed, but with no arrestor gear engaged at the touchdown end, he came to rest in the East End carrot field. After much pulling and pushing, the local haulier retrieved the aircraft and returned it to its final resting place. From then on, the back 9 arrestor barriers were engaged at both ends at all times. As we move into the 1980s, the 81st Wing are getting to know their new aircraft, the A-10 Tankbuster, introduced to Bentwaters by Colonel Wacker, 81st Wing Commander. The A-10 is popular for its Gatling gun. The number of A-10s will reach 120 total, making up 6 squadrons, although the 509 and the 511 squadrons will eventually move to Alconbury, leaving the 510th Squadron to serve as a 4th Squadron to the 81st Wing. Some A-10s will be TDY to the forward bases on the continent for ongoing exercises. The Ivy Lodge Gate is well used, as it intersects the Thompson Drive. This was so named in memory of Colonel Thompson, who was tragically killed when his A-10 crashed during an air show at Chicksands. The Ivy Lodge Gate also provides easy access to the new warehouse complex. Now, the 81st Air Force personnel were always ready to show their appreciation to civilian staff for a job well done, a squadron pluck, or whatever. The American workplace is taken very seriously. They are so dedicated. The late Mrs. R.a.f. Fletcher received the highest civilian award from the Department of Air Force. Her outstanding work as finance officer in the Base Civil Engineering Squadron, presented by Colonel Tabor, 81st Wing Commander, it has to be said that her untiring efforts contributed immensely to the success of the base mission. She also received the 81st Wing Plaque from Colonel Granskog. She retired in 1983 following an officers' mess reception. This is Woodbridge Chapel, set in the pine trees. One particular sad occasion comes to mind: a funeral for Colonel Olson, who sadly, with the RAF helicopter linesman or winchman, drowned in the North Sea. The Colonel had bailed out of his troubled A-10, but with very rough seas, the RAF Wessex helicopter had to abort the rescue. The 2 bodies were recovered later by the Woodbridge-based H-53 Sikorsky. Mrs. Nanette Olson, formerly Miss Anglia, originated from Ipswich. Now, we had another addition to the Bentwaters flight line. The 527th Squadron flying F-16s known as the Aggressors. They were all part of A-10 aircrew training. Ongoing projects include complete refurbishment of airmen's barracks on both bases, all helping to improve comfort for the troops. Rebuilding the base continued on a massive scale. This is the old communications block converted into the new wing headquarters, a vast improvement from the wartime tin hut complex on Site 1. Good planning and programming over the past 40 years had paid off. The redevelopment of Bentwaters was almost complete. The police headquarters, Mission Support Centre, A-Fees Extension, Burger Bar, Sports Centre, Medical Complex, a bank, open mess and community block. All these facilities bringing the base up to a first-class military establishment. It has been taken from this to this. Private land, areas shown in red, have been developed into well over 500 private housing units for use by the Air Force families. Not to forget the airfield and its extensions, taking it from this to this, and all its fine aircraft maintenance buildings. Making a difference, it certainly did. Into the 1990s, not knowing what the future holds, but always ready and prepared to face Cold War situations. Desert Storm would call upon the A-10s to participate in the action. Their presence in the desert would extend beyond Victory Date. Here we see Captain McClintock being greeted by his family following his tour in Saudi Arabia. Back at Bentwaters, it has been confirmed that military operations would cease here in the summer of 1993. An unexpected development, but inevitable, given the streamlining and advancing modern Air Force techniques. The commander, Colonel Roger Radcliffe, the 32nd and last 81st Wing Commander, will oversee the closure, with Squadron Leader Peter Roney, the RAF Station Commander. A hangar dance is arranged, and the public will attend the 1992 Air Friendship Day.
Commandant Sergeant fails to contact the Maintenance Operations Centre.
Few of those today, I expect. Get yourself low and fast along the runway. Excuse me, up the runway.
licence, served with the Royal Australian Air Force.
The C5 will make use of its recently completed parking ramp to remove equipment back to the States. Everyone was invited to witness the departure of the two remaining A-10s and get that last autograph. So there it is, after 50 years of military activity in this tiny corner of Suffolk, change must come.